So, Mike, the last time you and I talked about David Niven, I would say that the quality of the film that Mr. Niven was involved with was substantially lesser than I would say even the first 5 minutes of this movie is.
Yeah.
Dr. Dodson, that film, the last film that we talked about with Mr. David Niven was when we covered on Rankin' on Bond, Casino Royale, a movie that, it sure does star David Niven, doesn't it, Mike?
But almost 20 years later? Is that right? That seems crazy.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Wow. And he kept going until that one of those Pink Panther movies where he passed away during the middle of production, if memory serves.
That's right.
Very, very sad. He contracted ALS.
Yeah. And I want to say that Rich Little came in and did the voice for him or something. I remember this from when I was a kid. I can't, don't quote me on anything.
Well, we're going to start quoting you on everything now, Mike.
Oh, shit.
Right.
Was that Trail of the Pink Panther with Roberto Benigni? Oh, man, that was a disaster.
Oh, no. This was an actual proper Inspector Clouseau one, yeah. Not even the Steve Martin version of it.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Well, now that we're really bringing in the great Pink Panther movies into the conversation.
Yeah.
Not the mediocre ones anymore. On this episode of the Culture Cast, though, I am still your host, Chris Dashy, much to the chagrin of many, and I'm joined by one of the hosts of Rankin' on Bond, the host of the internet's greatest movie podcast, as far as I'm concerned, your friend and mine, Mr. Mike White.
Stupidity has saved many a man from going mad.
And also joining us, you heard him on the Oliver podcast. You hear him all the time over on Someone's Favorite Productions. He works with a dear friend of this show, Ryan Verrill, on a whole host of stuff. And his most recent book, American Twilight Cinema of Toby Hooper, is now in paperback. Your friend and mine, Dr. Will Dodson.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. On this episode, we're going to be talking about 1946's romantic comedy, A Matter of Life and Death.
Come in, Lancaster. Are you bailing out?
Yes, Jude, I'm bailing out, but there's a catch. I've got no parachute. What do you think the next world's like? I'll know soon enough anyway. I'm signing off now, Jude. Goodbye.
It's heaven, isn't it?
Peter couldn't have got away with it. He was due here half an hour after me. There's been a mistake.
When the records don't balance, all the alarm bells start ringing in the records office.
Oh, so there have been mistakes.
We'll explain your grave error to Squadron Leader Carter and ask him to follow you. Oh, Peter, it was a cruel joke.
If it was on me. I've fallen in love because of your mistake. Well, if it's a respectable place, there must be a law of appeal. But this has never been done.
I call Squadron Leader Peter D. Carter. You claim you love her.
I do love her.
Would you die for her?
I would, but I'd rather live.
So the film is directed by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, written by the two, produced by the two, and it stars, like we've kind of already alluded to, David Niven, Roger Livesey, Raymond Massey, and Kim Hunter. The film is all about David Niven, who plays Peter David Carter, a bomber pilot who was supposed to die and doesn't die, and then heaven goes, hey, that guy's supposed to be dead. Get back here, guy who's now alive that's supposed to be dead. It's all very quaint, it's all very proper, and it's all very, very British. Dr. Dodson, I'm going to kick it to you first. History with A Matter of Life and Death.
Interesting film that I thought that I had seen it. And then when I watched it, realized that I had not. I knew of it because it was kind of the last of that group of films that Alan Pressburger made that were kind of rah-rah post-war British and American, alliance films. Like I know where I'm going, what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. I know where I'm going. Yeah,
right. And Life and Death of Colonel Blimp and all those. And so I was actually pleasantly surprised to see, Kim Haystella Hunter in a different kind of role. Obviously, David Niven is a treasure. I won't, jump into the film just yet, but yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff happening in it. Really interesting, and it made me go out and look at some other movies that I'll bring up as we get into the conversation. That have some, I think, interesting connections.
What about you, Mike?
I was very unfamiliar with this, and I was glad that you asked me to be on this episode because I really have kind of a blind spot when it comes to Powell and Pressburger. Big fan of Michael Powell's Peeping Tom, which I've seen dozens of times. Really, I've only seen 2 Powell and Pressburger films before this, The Red Shoes and Black Narcissus. And even though this didn't have a color in the title of it, I said I'd go ahead and watch it anyway, because I think I might have run out of colors by now. But yeah, I was really glad to be able to see this. I had seen a lot of images from this film before, not knowing that I had. And you brought up Kim Hunter. She doesn't look like Kim Hunter to me. Like when I saw her name come up in the credits, I was like, oh, cool, Kim Hunter. We just talked about her on an episode of The Shabby Detective where she was the dingbat aunt of I always forget the guy's name, the guy who gets tripped up by Columbo with the gloves at the end. Ross.
Oh, Ross. Oh,
right.
Yeah. Suitable for framing, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
She does not look like that same person.
No.
She looks like a totally different person in this. And yeah, it was great. And then Richard Attenborough showing up for like 5 minutes. I'm like, all right. But yeah, it was great. I had a great time watching this.
Ross Martin.
Thank you.
Yeah, the screaming at the end of Suitable for Framing where he's staring at the picture. I had never seen this either, but again, obviously, this is one of the months this year that I did program, so I can take credit for us watching this, and primarily because of David Niven. I mean, I was looking for romantic comedies that were a little atypical, and I mean, again, I'm not going to miss an opportunity to talk about a David Niven movie because earlier this year on Rankin' on Bond, we talked about Casino Royale, which was such a fucking affront to like so much of what made James Bond fun. That movie is like the antithesis of it. But I think one of the singular bright spots in that entire movie is actually David Niven and his performance. I actually think like what he's doing with James Bond is somewhat interesting in a movie that is more or less throughout unfunny. All that to say, I think he's really good in this movie. In a lot of ways, David Niven almost gets lost in the shuffle of everything else, not because his performance isn't good, but because I think, and neither one of you have mentioned it yet, but I think I will, there's a lot going on here. Like a lot. And it's a fantasy movie, but I would go as far as to say it might be high fantasy. Like it kind of pushes against what I was expecting it to be, and it gets really, no, I wouldn't say bogged down because that would imply that I don't appreciate where the finale of the movie went. It goes some places I was not expecting, and I think that is due in a lot of part to the cultural influence of where part of the movie is coming from, especially the Britishness of the movie. But I enjoyed this movie a lot. Similarly to y'all, like I had never seen it. I just knew about it. Powell and Pressburger films, have not seen a single one. This is the first one that I've seen. I mean, I know how important Peeping Tom is. You know, it gets brought up in Scream. I believe in Scream 3 or 4, they bring it up as, you know, Peeping Tom, the original slasher movie. You know, there's that whole, bit about that. So I knew about that. But again, like going into this movie, it is visually arresting in a way I was not expecting a film from 46 to be, more or less immediate. But yeah, just at the outset, like this is a weird movie that does not feel like it belongs in 46. Like, and in a lot of ways, I'm kind of surprised that this movie's never been remade. I mean, again, like the idea of this movie has been kind of batted around, but not specifically this. And I could assume why, given the finale of this movie may not work for some people, and I would understand why it wouldn't. I really enjoyed this movie. So I'm glad to hear that we were at least on the same page at the outset that this movie was an interesting watch. And yeah, I think the place to start for me at least anyways, and the thing I'm curious with y'all just, up front, the amount of special effects in this movie is wild. Like, I mean, for 46, this movie doesn't play like a film from 46.
No, that's what I really like about these Powell and Pressburger films that I've seen so far, is they feel so advanced, and it feels like they are having such fun with the camera and really pushing it. I mean, you've got, so like you said, so many effects. The use of the color and the black and white, I haven't seen it used that well in I don't know how long. I mean, we've all seen black and white movies that might jump to color at the end, or vice versa, or sometimes you cut back and forth, but it's usually on the reel change. But this, it does not feel like we're sitting there for 10, 15 minutes before the reel changes to move back to a color sequence or back to a black and white sequence. And also the whole thing of the world is color and heaven is black and white, which is also nice, because you would think it might be opposite because heaven is so great and so wonderful. But instead, it just feels like this almost bureaucratic nightmare up in heaven. And maybe people are having a good time, but I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing a lot of cases, and we got to have the counts right. And it's almost like accounting is going on up in heaven. So no wonder it's black and white.
Yeah. How's the song lyric go? In heaven, there is no beer. That's why we drink it here.
That's right.
Yeah, I like that. It was kind of, well, I mean, it fits the theme of the movie, right? That the brief time, the brief line segment that we have of life is what's packed with all of the pleasures and pains and sensuality and romance, all the feeling, right? Like eternity is almost by definition boring.
Right, has to be.
Right.
Because it's eternity.
Right. That's why all the vampires get so decadent after a few thousand years, right? It was weird. Anytime I watch anything, my mind always goes to the darkest place it can. And in this case, it went to Lilium. You know Lilium, the 1934 Fritz Lang movie? It's an adaptation of a Hungarian play. So right away, I'm going into a dark place. It's a 1930s German adaptation of a Hungarian play. It was the only French movie that Lang made. And the story is about this ne'er-do-well who kind of falls in love, and he gets his girlfriend pregnant, needs money, so he joins a heist. The heist goes bad, and so rather than get caught, he kills himself, goes to kind of a sort of adjunct of heaven where he's going to be judged, and he gets a chance to go back and make some things right for his daughter who's been born, right? And so that's the theme of kind of being judged and being in that space between life and death, still being able to hold on to your life and desperately trying to stay as long as you can, is what reminded me of as a thematic connection between the two. Incidentally, the sort of angels of death in Lilium, their costume design is what was the inspiration for Dark City, the Alex Proyas movie. I'm eventually going to get back to A Matter of Life and Death. Last thing about Lilium, and then I'll get into how it kind of connected for me. Lilium was then adapted by Rodgers and Hammerstein as Carousel. So that's the long life of Lilium, from Hungarian play to Carousel. They take the suicide out in Carousel. But so I kept thinking of Lilium and Carousel as I watched Matter of Life and Death, and that desperation that Niven feels, even though he plays it in such a restrained way. As you say, that the Britishness of it, but you hear it in his voice. Now that he's fallen in love, he can't leave, right? You can't take me now. Like this is what life is for. I'm jumping out of the plane without a parachute again. And that's what falling in love is, right? Jumping without a parachute. There's something really at stake there, that I bought into, even though, from a certain modern cynical perspective, you could call it kind of schmaltzy, but I bought it. I bought it right away.
I mean, we've seen this whole idea of heaven screwing up in some way before. I mean, there's Heaven Can Wait, if memory serves. Oh, Heavenly Dog, which Chris and I just watched recently.
Oh boy, we sure did. We sure did watch that, didn't we?
And really, the heaven there is almost as bureaucratic as the heaven here.
Yeah.
I was definitely thinking of Heaven Can Wait throughout a lot of this. I really like, though, the idea of, is this real or is it just fantasy? Is it all taking place in his head? And this whole idea of the trial that happens, I know I'm jumping way ahead, but that coinciding with the surgery. I mean, basically, it's nice that it's not, we don't have to read this as a heaven story. We can just be like, no, it's a fantasy that's going on in his head at the same time. But I like how they visually tie those things together. You have, well, throughout this whole movie, you've got this whole series of ovals going on. So you've got like when they're looking down from heaven, and you've got that great shot of them like looking down, and they've got all the circles throughout there, or ovals through there. You've got that camera obscura, which then, Chris, I was reminded of Night Gallery, that camera obscura episode that we watched of that, where you've got the doctor who's turning the wheels and can see his whole domain, see everyone in town, and is kind of spying on people, very godlike with him as well, the way that he's, oh, I see that this person is coming, and oh, she's rushing over here, and all this. And then you have the eye, like it's not two eyes that are closing when he gets the ether or whatever it is, the anesthesia during the surgery. It's one big eye, and that draws so much attention to itself. We're just like, holy shit, what am I watching? And then you realize, oh, I'm inside of David Niven's head, and his eye is closing. What an amazing shot that was.
Yeah, that was so cool.
Well, and again, it speaks to the idea of like pushing the envelope when it comes to telling this story and the way it's being told. Like, I was not expecting to see some of this in a film from 46, but here we are, especially like a lot of the practical effects, like that thing with the eye. I mean, all of the practical effects, frankly.
Well, they were doing some great stuff because British films, they really were just on top of it when it came to rear projection stuff. There's one moment in the film, and I think this is what's going on, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like it's a rear projection. It looks like the doctor is standing in this doorway looking out, and you've got Kim Hunter coming up to the house, and you can see a real quick little blip there where it looks like it goes from rear projection. She goes out of frame and then comes into frame up onto the stairs like the real actress, and marries into him standing there. It was so nice. I'm like, oh, okay. We don't have to be in a practical location in order to do that. We can use rear projection. But they do have great location work in here. I mean, that beach scene, all the beach stuff is, holy cow, that looks great. Especially when he thinks he's dead right after he jumps out of the plane. And I mean, again, the way that it's shot, we're not supposed to know if he's alive or dead either. And yeah, the way it's shot is it's so good. I mean, it's just so visually arresting. And they knew what they were doing with the scenery and the imagery and what it's evoking, because it does, even for a moment, it allows you to think like, is he dead? Like, did he actually, like, what is happening here? And then it kind of gets revealed very slowly. And that for me was just, again, like a very interesting way of doing it, like a very kind of reserved and metered way of giving the information, not giving it out immediately. Again, like, I really think the Britishness of this movie is in full effect, like constantly, because again, like, it's the way that they tell this story is there's not a lot of bombast. Even when there is, like, it's still very reserved. And like, I appreciate that because again, it makes it not feel more realistic, but it does in my mind. And the commentary kind of gets into this a little bit. The idea of, is this actually happening at all? Or is this in his head? And I like that the movie kind of just doesn't take a side. I mean, and it does, but it doesn't, but it does. Like, it does a good enough job at giving you questionable moments throughout the movie, like, again, juxtaposing the surgery with the trial to be like, oh, what is going on here? And the movie never says. That's the other really nice thing about the movie, is like the ambiguity is left ambiguous. Like, it is genuinely ambiguous, but it all just feels very uptight and
British. And like that, I really appreciate it about the movie that it sticks to its Britishness, even though like part of the movie is, I mean, like subtextually about the Brits and the Americans. And, you know, I just recently watched the Americanization of Emily, and I feel like there's a little bit of that here too. Just like these two cultures are diametrically opposed, but not really. It's like, okay, we are more alike than we are different. No shit. Like, no shit. Like,
I don't even know if that's the subtext or if it's the super text, because it is really in your face, especially in the trial scene where it's here. We have stacked the jury against the British person with all of these people that are victims of the British Empire. And then when they say, oh, no, we're going to replace the entire jury with Americans. And then they still are from kind of different stripes and everything. But it's much more of like, oh, look, America's a melting pot and how great they are and everything. And it really seems to be playing up to, I mean, especially having Kim Hunter as your love interest in this whole thing of the Brit and the American. And can they get along? Will their love survive? And it just feels like, please, America, please keep us in your good graces. We're really not that bad.
Yeah. Well, to your point about the Britishness of it, I'll touch on another aspect of Britishness, which I thought was really interesting. How they kind of removed any hint of Gothic trappings. Normally when you have spirits and ghosts and things like that, you have some element of the Gothic. But I believe the first version of the script did have ghosts and ghostly happenings, supernatural events in it. But then those were revised out and replaced with this new emphasis on science, neuroscience in particular, psychology, right? With the character of the doctor, played by, what was his name?
Roger
Livesey.
Roger Livesey. What a voice! My
God,
I wanted. But I thought that was, we talked about the special effects, but one special effect that was so cheap was the conceit of the doctor insisting that everybody buy into Niven's hallucinations as he pegged them, which meant that everyone, in each scene, rather than resisting the stories that Niven was telling, was enabling them to or facilitating them is a better word. And that allowed for a more seamless interaction between Niven and Conductor 71, right? The French fop, who has the most famous line of the movie, right? What is it? Heaven starved for Technicolor.
Yeah.
I thought that was great too.
A great meta moment, like, I mean, I found that moment to be very cheeky and fun. Like, and I wish there was more of that in the movie. But again, like the movie does do more of it. It just doesn't do it as obviously or as upfront. Like that's like pretty overt. I feel like I feel like everything else. Yeah. Like there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of stuff about chess, and like the usage of like statues and statuaries, like all kinds of like really specific imagery that exists to, I guess, further reinforce the difference. But again, like it's the difference, but the similarities at the same time between both sides of the coin. But everything that's going on is affecting, the stuff that's happening in quote heaven unquote is affecting the real world and vice versa. And like I like that there's moments in the movie where those lines are blurred, but I do like that the movie also, like you mentioned, Mike, it's not really subtext. Like it's very obvious. It's like they're going for it with the British and American like thing. They're really going for it.
Yeah, I love Conductor 71. I love that. I'm sure that they've had Death playing chess well before the Seventh Seal or Seventh Signs, or Seventh Seal. I always get, my Bergman and my Demi Moore films mixed up. But, him being Conductor 71, being so fascinated by chess and borrowing the chess book. And I'm just like, oh, that's really nice. And also playing with the black and white of the chessboard and all this. And yeah, I love when he comes in and he's just, it's fascinating because he starts being very much on the side of heaven. And there's even one part where they're on the the American title, Stairway to Heaven, when he's trying to convince, hey, why don't you use this person to defend you? And boy, oh boy, Powell and Pressburger almost got into real problems because there was a statue of Muhammad there, but I noticed that they just didn't show that likeness of the person. So they avoided, being firebombed in their homes or anything, having a fatwa released on them. But yeah, when he's going up on the stairs, at one point, Niven's like, what are you doing? You're not, you're on their side basically. But by the end of the movie, he is fully on David Niven's side. And I think Conductor 71 feels like he doesn't really buy into all the heaven malarkey. And you can kind of see that glimmer in his eye. Like as he's getting into this, he's getting into it. And he's just like, oh yeah, no, I am going to help this guy out because I do believe that in this. Plus, I just want to kind of screw up the system.
Well, of course, he had to be a Frenchman, right? Because he's always going to side with the lovers, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Had he been a German, it wouldn't have even been a movie. It would have been like, well, the form says you got to come back, so it's over.
No choice. Fine print, baby. You should have read it.
Mm-hmm. He just seems like he's having such a fun time through this whole thing, and like to compare this role versus he was the composer, conductor guy from the Red Shoes, and he's just so uptight and everything. And then in this movie, he just always has that jaunty grin and just is toying with everyone the whole time. He's great. I love everybody in this movie. I'm such a fan of. And yeah, you're talking about the doctor and that awesome voice that he has. How cool does he look when he's all in his black leather with his riding goggles and stuff and his little red goatee and his big horse teeth and stuff? I'm just like, this guy, man, I want to be passed on the road by this guy.
Yeah, well, he gave me real Lawrence of Arabia vibes, and then he ended up just like Lawrence of Arabia.
and I love that whole arc of the story with the doctor who starts out as like, again, like he's I don't think he's ever hesitant to believe David Niven, but like, again, like he is viewing this very much as a doctor of science. But then I love that he dies. And it's like, of course he dies, right? Like, of course, because now he's on the other side. And, the moment you see kind of where this is going and you see the scene where he dies, which is like, again, like it kind of comes out of nowhere. He's like, I'm going to get an ambulance. And then all of a sudden he's like just a fucking ball of flames. But then once that moment passes, you realize like, oh, right. Now he's dead. Like, it's not as, again, like in another movie, it would be a problem. In this movie, it's not as much of a problem as all of a sudden a easy fix it's the solution to the problem now. It's not a problem in and of itself. Like they have the solution right there, which is now he can defend you because he's dead. Isn't that fun? I know.
Well, I certainly read it, and I may be wrong, but I read it that Livesey was very affectionate towards Kim Hunter. And not necessarily in a paternal way, but in a restrained way. Like he was very flirtatious with her, but he never made a pass because it was almost like he had already made peace with the fact that she wasn't going to go for him. But, I've never seen such a sexually charged ping pong game.
And when the camera is whipping back and forth, that's what I'm talking about when it comes to like, they're having so much fun with the camera, just we'll do whatever. And I love it.
Yeah, that scene was how I knew for sure that this was the movie that directly preceded Black Narcissus and the Red Shoes. This was Powell and Pressburger really opening the door into sexuality.
Well, I love that it's a ping pong game too, because because you know where it's going to in that scene. You're like, they're going to stop it at some point. It's going to get frozen and they're going to do the thing where they're frozen mid ping pong game and the ball is going to be frozen in midair. And then they do it. And it, again, like that scene has so much going on that isn't that, but then like that ends up coming in and like taking everything out of the scene with Niven and the conductor. But yeah, again, like the doctor and Kim Hunter together, like from the moment they're on screen together, they have a weird chemistry too of like what is their relationship. And then David Niven kind of just inserts himself and it makes sense. But yeah, like again, like you see that the doctor is definitely grappling with feelings towards Kim Hunter that might be somewhat unrequited. I mean, completely unrequited, possibly.
I looked him up, Roger Livesey, because that voice, I was like, I must have seen this guy in 100 movies and I know it. But I looked up his filmography, and other than the Powell and Pressburger movies he's in, I'm not familiar with any of them. He didn't. I thought, well, maybe he did the voice of some Disney character. No, nothing like that. So I don't know where I've heard his voice before, or maybe it's just I've heard someone similar. But it is such a distinctive and mahogany kind of voice. Just really, that's the sort of sensual center, and I don't mean sensual in a erotic way, but it's like the sensual center of the movie. This calm yet driven feeling that Livesey's voice has, that kind of conjoins Hunter and Niven as partners. I feel. I might be reading too much into it. Maybe I'm falling in love with them. I don't know.
It's easy to do.
Also, the success of the movie is making you really buy into their relationship. And I mean, the movie is what, hour 40 minutes? And I mean, it flies by, and the last third of the movie is a court case. Like straight up the last half an hour of the movie is a court case. And like even then I'm so invested that I buy in completely. And like the machinations of that last act of the movie, I think, is so interesting, because again, like the first two acts of the movie are very different from what the third act is, like in a way that, again, like all they're really doing is setting up that discussion to be had in the third act. But again, like in the context of what this movie is trying to do, I think it works. But man, like the balls on Powell and Pressburger to do a third act that's just a court case in the middle of this like romantic comedy it's pretty wild, because again, like it works. It really works, because again, you really buy into the Kim Hunter and David Niven relationship.
Oh, and can we talk about, well, for me anyway, the surprise cameo appearance by the great Raymond Massey as the prosecuting attorney. Abraham Farland. What a great name, for a sort of a down home country prosecutor. And Massey was not menacing, but intimidating.
He could be menacing, though. I mean, him as Jonathan Brewster in Arsenic and Old Lace, that's where I mostly know him from, just towering over poor Peter Lorre.
Anybody ever tell you look like Boris Karloff?
And then I forgot that Anna Massey's going to be in Peeping Tom in like a couple decades here. So
right.
The family. But yeah, he was great, and just kind of fire and brimstone, and just everything that the doctor had to bring up. He was just like, oh, I'm ready for that argument here. Let me argue against that. Yeah, he was great in those close-ups. He was so intense in those close-ups. He was so good.
Well, and remember, Mike, the last time I think we saw him was Night Gallery.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Was that the earwig one? Or was he like the Great White Hunter in that?
He was the Great White Hunter, where his head was on the wall at the end.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that he was intimidating, because he was playing like this like stodgy, uptight father who's like, you have to kill the, buffalo or whatever the fuck it was. He's really good at portraying a character that is, convinced of his moral like resolve, and it being like there's a level of like, this guy is convinced that he is morally just, period, that makes perfect sense with what they're going for, with when his character is like comes from, and what they say, like, oh, he was part of the revolution 1775. Like, you're talking about an American with a capital A, like, and that's the thing, like it's so smart. Like it's like, of course, like that, of course, that's the person that you're going to have. And that he's going to go, well, yeah, let me get all these people that are being just like us, that are being, rousted by the Brits, like the Indian Empire, which made me laugh out loud when there's like an Indian guy. And I was like, oh, of course, yeah, of course, great. But
to see all those Indian guys in the crowd,
I know, right?
They all looked like they were Sikh, though. They all had turbans on.
Yeah. I mean, maybe not the most accurate, But I like that idea of like, okay, so we have the crimes of the British Empire being judged by partial victims of not partial victims, like victims of the crimes of the British Empire.
When the last guy who speaks up is Irish, I'm just like, oh well, there's the laugh line in the theater right there.
Right. Yeah. It's like, oh boy, really going after us.
Yeah. Do the old collar pull on that one.
Know.
Oh boy, sorry. We're still in war with these guys. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked that little comment. I mean, we read it the way we do, and I wonder if it was a little less
right
nuanced from that point of view, but maybe not. I mean, you have to have some awareness of where your money and power and comfort, comforting material goods are coming from. The film reminded me, I know I keep bringing up other movies, but I have to do this. And I wasn't sure where I was going to do it in the conversation, so it might as well be now that I have started speaking without knowing where I was going. And that is Albert Brooks' Defending Your Life.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
From 1991, which actually, I had remembered it being earlier than that for some reason. I didn't think of it as an early 90s movie, but it's pre-Tarantino, so it's still kind of, you can still be kind of old-fashioned in a sense. But so I rewatched Defending Your Life, which I hadn't seen since I was very young, just the other night, because I wanted to see just how similar it was to A Matter of Life and Death. And it really is similar. I mean, you have the same bureaucratic pre-heaven, right? In Judgment City, Albert Brooks is, literally defending his life, right? But it did not, for those who haven't seen the movie, not defending your life in the existential sense, but defending your actions in life to a council who's saying, you could have done better here, you could have done better there. But where it's most similar to Matter of Life and Death is the relationship, falling in love. He falls in love with
Meryl Streep.
Meryl Streep, thank you. Who was that actress again? Meryl Streep.
She was in just a couple things, then kind of faded out. I know. I was like, whatever happened to that lady that was in Silkwood?
Right. Well, hopefully not the same thing that happened to the lady from Silkwood. But the love story, right, of Brooks and Streep in that film has quite a bit in common, not necessarily plot wise, but feeling wise. This kind of instantaneous magnetic attraction, knowing that you've met the one right at the moment where you don't get to have that that love, and because that love is so right, the powers that be decide to make an exception, right? And I mean, I have to think, surely, I haven't read or listened to interviews, but surely Brooks was inspired by Matter of Life and Death heavily. And if he says he wasn't, then but I find that I liked Matter of Life and Death better because, well, and this is not really a criticism of Defending Your Life. That movie, it's intended for the main character to be this, neurotic and timid in many ways, or nervous character, whereas Niven is so self-possessed and even when he is frightened or desperate, he just projects this the Britishness, right? He projects this stiff upper lip, best foot forward, hip hip cheerio attitude that I really, it's what you like about David Niven, right?
Right.
Yeah. So the movies were very, very similar in theme, but very different in their execution, I guess. And I found it interesting to compare them.
And I was going to mention, since we're talking about other things, but this is something, Mike, you and I have actually talked about, and I'm surprised. I'm kind of shocked you haven't brought it up yet. Always, the Spielberg. Because again, it's like something about airplane pilots. There's a thing about death. There's angels. I mean, in this movie, it's not a body swap thing. I mean, it's not really an Always either, isn't it? What, John Goodman sees the ghost of Richard Dreyfuss? Is that what? I've kind of decided to blot that movie out of my memory. because
which was also based on an old movie. I'm trying to remember what it was.
Guy named
about
Joe,
right? Which was probably, when was that released? Right around this time?
43.
Okay, so just a few years prior to this. Yeah, this whole, I mean, gosh, just when they're talking about how many people died, holy shit. And when they're showing the map of the world and then they move in and you see Dresden just on fire, and, you know, when was this at? May 5th, 44? So just like a few days prior to the surrender of Germany. So it's just like how many casualties came in at that point. It's wild. And just the opening with Niven on the plane, and here's his dead friend, and everybody else is bailed out, and he's just flying blind on a rocket scooter, and nobody is going to say anything. It's wild that there's so much death in this movie. I mean, you know, sorry to go back to Always and a guy named Joe. It's just like dealing with that topic during the war, and especially right after the war. I mean, it's very, very chancy, I think, to talk about just how many people have died in this movie that is ostensibly a feel-good movie. You can be calling it a romantic comedy. The more I think about it, the more I'm thinking, is it really comedy or is it just a romance? I don't know, because it's pretty depressing at times.
It's not. I feel kind of bad that I picked it for this month in terms of it being a comedy, because it's not funny. Like, it's not. It's more of like a unconventional romantic movie, not really a comedy. Like, there's really nothing funny in this movie. I mean, I guess Marius Goring's the conductor is like the closest. He's a little, you know, effete. He's fun. He's, you know, gay coded as if
Have I ever told you about my operation?
Yeah. Like it's a very fun character, but in a movie where there's a lot of death, and like you mentioned, Mike, the idea that this is coming out in 43, or I guess 46, set in 43, like this is coming out at the time of the war is still fresh. If not, David Niven was in the war, for fuck's sake. Like, he was in World War II. So, I mean, again, like, you have people that have lived this in some respects, making a movie about it. And in a way, it's got to be a catharsis of its own. Because again, like you mentioned, Mike, like us so far removed from, you know, World War II, though some people don't realize it, the amount of people who died every day in World War II would make your fucking head spin. I mean, I'm saying the same thing about COVID, but hey, that's different, apparently. But the point being, it's hard to comprehend it. And then, like you said, to make a movie about it where it's like supposed to be happy. Like, like there's probably people who are going to see this movie that have no arms, no legs, have been deeply mentally affected by the war. Like, and this is like, hey, the war wasn't that bad. See, David Niven's having a good time. And it's like, what? Like, again, like I was thinking that when I was watching it, I was like, this is kind of a weird thing to do, but I think it's so endearing that it works. But it does kind of get close to being like, maybe not right. Like, give it 10 years maybe, and then make a movie about it. Like, don't push the World War II thing right like a year after the movie is set. Jesus Christ.
Well, it's a bit of propaganda, right? It's designed to shore up morale. But also, I read an interesting essay by Stephanie Zacharek, I don't know how to pronounce her name, I'm sorry, that pointed out that the hallucinations, right, that Niven is going through are perhaps watered down somewhat, but a depiction of a soldier struggling with PTSD that we didn't have the vocabulary for at that time. And so on the other hand, audiences could see this and perhaps relate to how Niven is trying to manage and navigate these difficult retransitioning into society as he's literally arguing for his life. And I don't know, it's hard to, I mean, it's impossible to say, not having lived through that period. So I certainly take your point that that people could be so raw of nerve that a movie like this might have seemed too soon. But at the same time, I take the point of it as a light in some ways, or a light treatment of heavy themes as a sort of gentle propaganda. And I don't use propaganda in the nefarious sense, right? Propaganda in the sense of national healing.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see this as a little bit of propaganda. I'm sure that the War Department was just like, hey guys, let's do this thing. In fact, I'm pretty sure I heard that they were behind this a little bit. This also, I talked recently on my show, The Projection Booth, recently about a German movie called The Apple Fell, which we weren't sure if it was necessarily a rebel film because it's taking place in post-war Germany. I want to say it was either 46 or 48. So it's like, I think it was 46. The world was still crumbled around their ears. But then we ended up saying, no, it was more of a film blanc. So as opposed to film noir, this was a film blanc. And when we were talking about that, the first one that came to our lips was A Matter of Life and Death. I didn't say it because I hadn't seen it at that point. But one of my co-hosts is like, oh yeah, like A Matter of Life and Death. That's like the example of a film blanc, kind of a feel-good film for you after the war. And then as I'm looking at other films blanc, a lot of them have to do with death. And there were a lot of them that were things like Opper and things where it's like ghosts coming back and putting things right. And this almost fits into that with this whole haven't made a mistake, we need to fix the mistake. But really, to your point, it'd be a brain injury that he got after he jumped out of that airplane and landed almost without a scratch. But yeah, this closed head injury. I love that they actually did a whole bunch of medical research for this film as well. And that was it Powell's brother-in-law was a plastic surgeon who had done all this work with a army doctor around brain injuries, because I hate to say it, but World War I was a prime time for people to study the brain because of all of the injuries that were going on. World War II was probably the same thing, where they were learning a lot about the human mind because of all of the brain injuries that were happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing throughout history how the traumas of war have led to medical breakthroughs. It's a really sad way that we advance.
Yeah. I remember, a lot of stuff came out of even the Civil War, like with how do people's stomachs work, because you could take a gut shot and still live. So we can actually look inside of your stomach and see how things happened. Okay. Like vivisection really isn't smiled upon. So we'll just wait until politics makes it so that we have a war and we can study that way. Sure.
Lots of dead bodies or people been maimed. Well, and that's the thing. Like, what I love about this movie is that, yes, there is the idea, the possibility. Again, it's rather strongly, I wouldn't say hinted at, but you kind of, I mean, you could make the case that this is just, like you said, a way to have this conversation in a way that having this conversation wasn't able to be had then. And I mean, again, does that diminish the value of the movie? No, I think it gives you an interesting way to interpret the movie at a later date or in a different way. But I don't think it gets in the way of the story that the movie, I think, is overtly telling, which is the story of David Niven's character picking drawing the short straw of humanity, which is heaven fucked up. And and that's on them. And that's the thing. It's like, it doesn't get in the way of that story, which in and of itself is a really, we
balancing act.
Yeah, but what's interesting is I've never seen a movie have this kind of specific conversation this way. I've seen I'm gonna go to hell to get my wife back, and we've seen that a million times, with What Dreams May Come, which is another kind of one of these kinds of things where heaven and hell are kind of...
It's Orpheus story, right?
Yeah. But I think this having this kind of weird, is it happening or isn't it? And then there's this other aspect of an actual court case. I think that all makes this a lot more interesting than I really was expecting this movie to be. Frankly, not at all. But again, it decides to have a lot of conversations that movies at the time aren't even wanting to think about having. And here they're like, well, we're going to have it. And not only are we going to have this conversation, we'll also have another conversation at the same time through the subtext of the movie. And the juxtaposition of, again, the Brits and the Americans and the cultural differences on the face of it as well. There's so much just going on that it was it's shocking how much is going on in this movie.
Yes. I'm shocked.
Shook.
Yeah.
Even.
I was trying to put it into words. Yeah.
I don't know if this is true or not, but I was very taken by the gentleman that plays the judge, who then it ends up, he's the surgeon, which is kind of a nice little, Chris, we were just talking about Under the Rainbow, the
Wizard of Oz in
Wizard of Oz type thing. Yeah. Abraham Sofayer, I believe is the gentleman's name. And he has a big responsibility. Being able to pull that nose off is a big responsibility. And I was looking him up, and he was one of these actors where he would play different races a lot. So like his picture on IMDb is him dressed up almost like a Maharaja type of Indian guy. And I'm just like, oh, okay.
Well, he was Burmese himself.
Was he Burmese? Okay, because he's fantastic. Chris, I think he played one of the guys on Kolchak the Night Stalker. Remember the Horror in the Heights episode that starts off with the there's a swastika right at the beginning because it's a bunch of Indian folks that are running. I think they're running a restaurant or something, and they get attacked by a mystical creature.
Sultan's Palace, isn't that the name? I think
you're right. Holy cow!
Yeah.
Good call, man.
Yeah, I remember that episode. I don't remember him, but what's funny is like that nose, like man, like yeah, that nose allows him to pull off like because I was looking at his filmography as well as like he played a lot of like indigenous Americans as well, and it's like yeah, I bet like the whole Mel Brooks thing, like kind of works, like
Yeah, I didn't realize he was Burmese, but that's great because he seems to play ethnic as much as like a Tony Quinn, where it's just like, oh yeah, no, isn't Tony Quinn's actually like Mexican or something? And right. He played Greek, he played Indian, he played every single race under the sun.
And I swear, for the longest time, I thought Anthony Quinn was Greek because he was so good.
Oh yeah,
I was like, oh, he's a Mexican,
right? And I'm used to him from being the strong man in the Fellini film.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure to mention that so far was Burmese because I didn't want listeners to think there was an Alec Guinness situation going on.
Right.
Mike, you mentioned something, the American title of the movie, and we kind of haven't talked about what I think is like the most visually arresting part of this movie, which is the titular, if you were watching this when it came out in the States, Stairway to Heaven, which...
It's an escalator to heaven.
Right. It's a moving stairway. So
there's a lady who knows all that glitters is gold, and she's buying an escalator to heaven.
I mean, it's amazing, right? Like in terms of like a practical effect, like this is
so good.
This is like one of those things where I know I can assume how they were doing it and what the machinations were that went into making this work, but it just looks so great. I kind of don't care. Like it works so well. And the way that they use it like throughout the movie and then at the end of the movie when they're standing in the surgery room and like all of that is happening, it's like, Jesus, this has been amping up throughout the movie. And then we get to the moment where it's like, and now these two worlds are like on top of each other. And this is what you're using to show that. And it's like, man, this again, like the visual choices and the visual language of this movie is just, it's really well defined and rich in a way that like, again, it's so fun. Like they know what they're doing and it is a serious movie, but there's a sense of fun to it.
That was fun. I have to admit, the first time I saw the escalator, the Mitch Hedberg joke jumped into my head. An escalator can never break. They just become stairs. So that's going in my head as I see the escalator slowly going up to heaven. And I'm like, man, I hope Mitch is up there. But yeah, visually arresting is the right phrase for it. It's such a simple image and such a huge set piece, right? They built that whole damn thing. And yeah, so a simple image, and yet the movement of it, especially in that scene where Conductor 71 is trying to trick Niven into sneaking him back in. So you see them slowly going up and up and up and closer before Niven realizes what's happening. Just the movement of it, the connection of the planes, as you said, in the the operating scenes, you have the worlds on top of each other. It's just so cool. You couldn't come up with a better image for it. Yeah.
And I mean, I would be remiss to not, I did a commentary recently on Jacob's Ladder. There's some Jacob's Ladder, was pulling from some of this as well. Obviously the ladder itself, but just this whole idea of that I've been stabbed and here's all of my dreams that are happening. It's so similar with this whole, like, I am on the operating table, but here's all the fantasy stuff that is happening at the same time. And just this whole convergence of the two. But yeah, when they lower all those people, and again, I don't know if obviously they had a few different sets, but as far as like the operating set versus the stair set, how they're actually doing that, if they're just setting the people up in front of it, it looks so good. And to have that crowd of all the jury just slowly coming down, and the judge and the prosecuting attorney and everyone back there. Oh, it's such a moment. Just when I saw it, I was like, I wish I could have seen this on the big screen. I really wish I could see this in the theater, and to see it too with an audience, especially everybody there for this movie, like a revival screening of it. I'm sure it would bring the house down.
Well, and that's the thing, like, again, like where the movie ends up and towards the end of the movie, like it does have that level of like grandiosity to it where like by the end, like I don't know, like that moment where the lawyer, the doctor throughout the movie, but now he's his counsel is like, just do it. Just trust me. Like, and you are like, the movie kind of cheats a little bit, but I love that about this movie because it makes it work. Like it cheats because the movie knows what it's doing and we don't know yet. And we're being asked to trust the character in the movie along with the characters in the movie. And I love that moment of just essentially like the movie's asking you to not only David Niven and Kim Hunter to give in to what he's saying, but also you to give into the movie and just trust the movie. Because it doesn't seem like there is a way out of that final situation. But when you realize kind of, what's actually happening here, and he knows for sure what's going to happen. Yeah, that's a moment that, like, again, like, I feel like if you're watching it with the right crowd, like it's a well-earned moment at the end of the film. The entire final like 5 minutes of the movie is just, again, you get the sense of like, and now the story is finished. And now we get to see like how these characters actually get to like somewhat live their lives a little bit. And I think, again, like the movie's just so smart in just giving us a little bit, but not giving us too much, because again, like I don't need to see everything. I just need to know how this kind of wraps up in a very kind of like, is a little saccharine where they're like, it's a very generous amount of time. It's a little schmaltzy, but I don't know, it feels earned.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that, the selflessness of Kim Hunter, right? 5 years before the film version of Streetcar Named Desire, she's prepared to sacrifice herself for an unstable man.
Right.
Yeah. Here she is ready to step onto the stairway and to take Niven's place. Complete and total purity of sacrifice, right? A thing that does not exist in the real world.
Right.
It probably does.
It can not like this though. Like
oh yeah, her just stepping right up. Like,
I know. It's just like,
yeah.
Like again, it feels a little schmaltzy, but the movie earns it. But like the fact that there is, that's the point, that the fact that there is no hesitation, that's the true love has no hesitation, right? True love means never having to say you're sorry.
Yeah. I'd probably do that for my kid, but I'd think about it for a second. I don't know. I'd step right in.
No, not per this movie's definition, not the truest of true love.
Right. And so, yeah, that's the moment that, right, you really have to buy into the movie or it's not going to work.
Right.
Are you as a cynical 2024 film viewer prepared to accept, right, this moment when Hunter, who does a lot, I think, with a role that is less complex, I think, than the doctor and Niven. I think that's the way I'm reading it. Feels a little less complex, but at the same time, it's what the character has to be, so pure of heart and so genuine and authentic, in order for you to believe that Niven fell in love with her just from the sound of her voice and the fact that he's desperate and about to die, which will drive anybody to the Mile High Club, you know. But yeah, that moment for me, like 9 times out of 10, when I see something like that in a movie, I'm just gonna be like, you know, oh. But this movie, it worked for me, and that's saying a lot for a guy like me. I think Hunter really.
Thank goodness they don't do it in the first 20 minutes.
Yeah,
Because it's him expressing his love for her, and yeah, it takes her a while. Like she probably is very much in love with him, but yeah, you wait an hour and 30 minutes into this movie, and then it's like, I'm already bought in. So there's no way that that's taking me out of the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and go back to the propaganda angle of it. It's kind of the perfect thing to remind us of the mutual sacrifice of our cultural alliance too, right? Like we're willing to die for each other. Where'd that go?
Yeah. Well, and that's where something like the Americanization of Emily really came to my mind, because the end of that movie, like the climax of that movie, similar to this, like you have a character making a decision that, I mean, in the Americanization of Emily, it somewhat goes against his beliefs, but once he's brought around to the idea that no, it is in line with your beliefs, that's the British character convincing the American character to act a certain way that he'd been acting throughout the movie. In this, it's the American character sacrificing themselves for the British character to convince the British character that they love them, but more to convince the cosmic world that the love is real, that the love between, like we've said, super textually, the love between the two countries is real. And yeah, it is a little propaganda-y, but that's okay. It is 46.
Yeah. And, well, and that reminds me, of course, of the climax of Defending Your Life, where, right, the whole movie is leading up to, Albert Brooks is afraid to take risks, right? And so at the last moment, as his soul has been taken to be returned to Earth to have to start over, and Meryl Streep's soul is being taken to like the next stage of enlightenment, he breaks free of his bonds to declare his love for her. And it's in that movie, it doesn't work as well for me. And I know Defending Your Life is a beloved film, so I don't want to like cause a bunch of mean comments on this on your podcast. But that moment to me registers a little more artificial, right? Like, I'm declaring my love. It's a moment of courage. It's the payoff of this movie. That feels more artificial than the moment in Matter of Life and Death, because of the. Yeah, and I think you're right, Mike. You say it takes an hour and a half to get there, and you really see it in Kim Hunter's face, right? Her performance is so based on her facial reactions to what's going on, her observations of the dynamics between Livesey and Niven, her watching Niven as he kind of talks to her and interacts with her. She builds up to that space where she's prepared to make this sacrifice. It's not so much an act of courage for her as it is the sort of obvious or natural result of the feeling they've built together. I don't know. I like it.
Yeah, and that it starts with her face, and not as close of a close-up of his face. We have to kind of show that flame in the background and just have him in this perilous situation. But her face, was it out of focus for you guys as well? I kept trying to find what plane was in focus.
It's a little bit.
I have to figure that's a choice, or they just didn't have a better take. But I mean, she gives such a bravura performance in that opening, just so upset about things and trying to talk to him and trying to know everything's going to be okay. And then she just keeps finding out more and more of just how dire a situation is.
She's so good in that opening scene. Like and again, I mean, she's great throughout the entirety of the movie, but I mean, in a lot of ways, like I kind of mentioned, like David Niven is in the movie and he is great, but I think her performance really is like the performance of the movie. Like it's the one that pretty much everything hinges on, because we have to get to that moment with her character. We are in that moment with her character. Now, because again, David Niven isn't really making that choice at the end She is making that choice because of him, but not for him. And again, like, I like that like you mentioned, Will, like a lot of times in these kinds of movies, it just doesn't work for me because it just doesn't feel genuine. There's no real chemistry between the two characters. And that's not the case here. Like, I think that David Niven and Kim Hunter together are believably good. And I can understand now why, looking at kind of the way this movie's been appreciated since it came out, it's on plenty of lists for good reason. I think it's because of the two of them and how good they are together. And the stakes of the movie, obviously, are part of it. But I think the relationship between the two of them is really good and really feels grounded in reality, even as this wild stuff is happening around them.
I don't know, man. I could go for a whole Frank Lively spin-off from this. Roger... Roger Lively as Frank Reeves. There we go. I knew there was a Frank in there somewhere. He is so cool in this movie, and he's such an important part to this. I totally agree with you, Chris, and I'm kind of just giving you a little bit of flack as far as like, no, this isn't David Niven and Kim Hunter's movie. It's all Roger Lively. But seriously, he's a perfect addition to that mix, and he's like literally the crossover between their two worlds.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that character now where he is in, and again, they say it's not heaven, so it's not heaven, whatever, the other space, this other spot that exists between time and space. They're not aliens. They're from in between the planes, or whatever they say in Indiana Jones' Kingdom of the Crystal
Space between spaces.
Oh, great. Yeah. Folding time and space in on itself. That's an interesting character to then, I think, follow beyond this story, because now you have this guy who's like, am I just going to keep doing this all the time? Like, I made, because like, what does he do then? Like, because that's the thing, like, heaven says they don't mess up, or wherever says they don't mess up, but they did. And of course, it
new public defender.
Yeah. I mean, yes. I would watch that. Like, I would watch that, whatever that movie or show would be, like something about the guy in purgatory who defends people from, I would watch that. That's interesting. But yeah, to your point, like, he's so good in the movie,
He would have been welcome to spice up Carousel. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. I would have rather watched his movie than R.I.P.D. 1 or 2.
R.I.P.D. 2?
Yes.
Or the sequel.
There is a sequel. It was a direct-to streaming sequel.
God.
It is a prequel, I believe.
Oh, wow.
I can't remember. I've tried to drive that from my brain because it was very bad.
I saw R.I.P.D. in theaters.
I saw R.I.P.D. in theaters too. Could have gone to see it together.
Yeah, yikes. What a great movie to see in theaters. Remember when Ryan Reynolds, was that Ryan Reynolds? Is that Ryan Reynolds?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
And the dude.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole reason you'd watch that movie is Ryan Reynolds and Jeff Bridges. But
oh, no. It was all about, I can't remember, the lady from Weeds. Mary's. She, her and her go-go boots were what did it for me.
I thought you were going to say CGI Kevin Bacon.
Oh, God. And all those weird Elvis references that never came to anything. Mary Louise Parker. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah, movies about heaven and hell and the machinations, like you could do a whole show about these kinds of movies. Because, I mean, again, Mike, you kind of mentioned it. We've like talked about them randomly recently a fair amount, or at least in the last year. Because again, I guess Always was a while ago, but you and I did that, and then...
Well, we do that almost every couple weeks on midnight viewing, because there's almost always no, heaven screwed up, or no, this happened, like deal with the devil, all those kind of things.
Yeah, anthology shows are full of heaven and hell and what the bureaucracy of the two. Well, I mean, again, we did just watch, like you mentioned, Oh Heavenly Dog, which does which does have a lot in common with this. This is a much better movie. Jesus. No gay, was it gay cats? Is that what it was?
Yeah. Alan Shoes,
Yeah, not gay frogs, unfortunately, gay cats.
No. Turning the frogs gay.
Yeah. God. Anything else we want to talk about with A Matter of Life and Death? That's a weird spot to ask that question.
No, I don't think so.
Well,
Dodson?
I highly recommend checking out Fritz Lang's Lilium if you can, because I think it's an interesting inversion of this story. There's a lot of nice double features you could pair with this, and I'd start with Lilium personally. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. A little off the beaten path for me.
Yeah, I was going to say, Dr. Dodson, final thoughts on A Matter of Life and Death.
Between life and death, all you got's love.
Love is all you need. That's what a wise man once said.
He was rich, though.
Yes, very true.
They were all bloody rich by them. Yeah.
Possibly even bigger than Jesus Christ, one might say.
Yeah, one might say that. One might get in trouble for saying that, but one might say that.
What about you, Mike? Final thoughts on A Matter of Life and Death?
Well, I just know that I need to start watching more Powell and Pressburger films. I need to stop waiting for revival screenings or the happenstance that I might see one over at the Nitrate Film Festival in Rochester, New York. But yeah, I need to see more of these guys' work because it is spectacular. I have yet to be disappointed.
Mike White, May of 2025, maybe?
Oh, there we go.
Right into Criterion and say, where's my 4K?
Right.
Yeah, that's where we need to get Ryan on the show for that. The king of the king of 4K. He was explaining to me I was just sitting there like as he was explaining it because I didn't understand it until he explained it to me.
Maybe you can tell me about it sometime because I'm just like, I finally just installed my Blu-ray player. Why do I need to upgrade again? So.
Because you don't get to see all of the colors, and that is actually what it is. Which, I mean, having seen something in 4K now, I kind of believe it. I get it. I get it. I will say this movie would probably look pretty good in 4K. And, we did, I think for me, we've mentioned a lot of things that this is similar to, and I mean, all of those things are great. And I think that this movie is great as well. I mean, we mentioned Wizard of Oz and other kind of weird things that this movie has kind of connections to. And I think that ultimately, what this film really resonated with me was again, a movie, an interesting story that, again, feels very similar to things I've seen before, but does and tells a story in a way that I was not expecting at all, but especially from a movie from 46 to be so smartly written, to be kind of so forward thinking in terms of the special effects. And then again, great performances from everybody. And it did, again, like I'm glad I got to watch more David Niven this year. I don't know how many more David Niven movies I have on the calendar. I think this might be one of maybe two, but this was a great movie and it's a great performance. And so you're similar to yourself, Mike. I would like to see more Powell and Pressburger stuff, and I would really like to see more David Niven stuff because, again, like the energy that he has, I really like. And I mean, he's so charming. He's so British. Like, there you go, right? Nothing wrong with either of those things. So on that note, we'll take a break and we'll play some ads and preview for the next Culture Cast.
Hi, I'm Susan.
And I'm Sharon. And we're the hosts of 80s TV Ladies.
Check us out wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
And please like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at 80s TV Ladies.
You can find interviews and exclusive behind-the-scenes content on all of your favorite 80s TV ladies.
80s TV Ladies is the place to go. Please join us.
80s TV Ladies.
Hi, this is HP from Noise Junkies.
And this is Father Malone from Dark Destinations.
Please join us as we examine one of the greatest sitcoms in television history, Taxi, on Night Mr. Walters, a Taxi podcast.
Good night, Mr. Walters.
Good evening, and welcome to Night Gallery.
Thank you, Rod. And I want to welcome everyone to Midnight Viewing, where once a month we talk all about your follow-up to The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling's Night Gallery.
They say it's Rod Serling's Night Gallery, and it isn't really Rod Serling's Night Gallery. It's somebody else's.
Oh, we know. We talk about it a lot. Your curators at Midnight Viewing are the Projection Booth's Mike White.
What can happen to human beings when trust is wiped out by suspicion?
And CultureCast's Chris Stashew.
Small boy encased in a crystal ball.
And I'm Father Malone.
The kind of thing that usually infests nightmares.
Join us monthly at midnight viewing the Night Gallery podcast at weirdingwaymedia.com.
Doesn't remotely belong to me. I have no proprietary interest in that at all.
This year, take a holiday to die for.
Say one word and it's
hilarious.
I don't want this to ruin our holiday.
Laugh out loud funny.
Get in.
Terrific. Funny as hell.
We both said what a nice couple we thought you were.
Sightseers in cinemas November 30th.
That's right. On the next CultureCast, we're going to be talking about Sightseers, and I'm going to be joined by Heather Drain on that episode. So until then, where can people find you, Dr. Dodson, and the things that you work on?
I got an Instagram now. I've been meaning to post more stuff, but you can find me at wdodson52 on Instagram and X.
Whoa, dude.
Yeah, I'm not
very
afraid of
edgy.
Yeah, so I'm very edgy. That's where I'm at.
He calls it by its real name, guys. Ooh, yeah. No Twitter for this man. What about you, Mike?
Well, yeah, I'm over on Twitter at ProBlueCast. You can find all the things that I work on over at weirdingwaymedia.com. So all the shows, Projection Booth, Shabby Detective, Life and Times of Captain Barney Miller. Yeah, it's a good time. Definitely check it out.
You're leaving a couple out.
Yeah.
It was intentional, I'm assuming.
Yeah, well, I have you around to fill in the blanks if you want.
That's fair.
How about you, Chris?
Yeah, you can find me over at Weirding Way Media as well, where things like Midnight Viewing and the Kolchak tapes. And I've shown up on some episodes of the Projection Booth. We did a thing that I'm very proud of. Was that last year where we did the Raiders of the Lost Ark thing? Yeah, where we did the reading of the transcripts of that, which was a lot of fun, and I'm really proud of that and was glad to have been able to do that. But yeah, you can find all that at weirdingwaymedia.com, along with so many other great things that have nothing to do with me and Mike, like 80s TV Ladies, Filmentaries, Feminine Critique, Cambridge and Washawn. Those are just more things that are great that you should be listening to that don't have me and Mike on them, I think, at all. I think I'm on one episode of 80s TV Ladies, and that's it. So, yeah, those are all the things you can find at Weirding Way Media. As for this show, culturecast.com, patreon.com/culturecast. $10 gets you ranking on Bond, which this month this is where we're talking about Casino Royale. So if you want to hear that conversation that we had, patreon.com/culturecast is where you can go to find that episode. And over at Mike's Patreon as well, you can find that at the $10 level as well. We're co-promoting it on both of our Patreons. So as always, Mike and Will, thank you so much both for joining me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Chris.
And as always, we'll catch you on the next episode.